Okay, so hello everybody. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining us. First, I just want to say thank you to Alon Glassman for initiating this year. He's been pushing me for a while. I've been wanting to do it for a while, and Baruch Hashem, we now got it together, and off we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you, and I've prepared a little bit of a PowerPoint just to understand where we're going. So the halachas of Shabbos are quite complicated, but in order to go into the technical of all the halachas, first I just want to give us get a little bit of a background. And once we've got the background, then starting from next week, we're going to go into specific malachas, and there are 39 malachas, as everybody knows, and therefore it's probably about a week per malacha. We'll try to do it in less if possible, but I think more importantly is to really get to understand things and then to bring practical application of those malachas, so that it's not just specific answers to specific questions, but rather it's real understanding of the material, understanding as much as we can, without too much technicality, but just so that it becomes a space where we have a certain depth of understanding. So I'm going to share my screen now, and off we go. Okay, so introduction to the 39 malachot. Let's begin. So let's first understand, we have this concept of Shabbos and the kedusha of Shabbos and how wonderful Shabbos is, but what does it really mean, and what does it mean, this concept of keeping Shabbos holy? So there is a number of Gemaras. These Gemaras that I'm bringing now are both in the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yud Chet. So here it says, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, everybody, whoever keeps Shabbos according to the halacha, even if such a person serves idols like they did in the time Kador Enosh, that in the times of Enosh. Now, Enosh was early on. It was actually the first person who kind of recognized the concept of Avodah Zarah. So even if a person is so involved in Avodah Zarah, but they still keep Shabbos, right? Then what? Mochlin lo, such a person is forgiven. Why? Because it says Ashrei Enosh Yaseh Mechalelo. The pasuk says that fortunate is the man Enosh, which is the person but playing in words, who does this and who holds strong to it and who guards Shabbos from desecrating, from machalelo. And the Gemara says, Al tikra machalelo ela machulo. Says, don't use the word as machalelo, meaning to desecrate, but rather use the word as machulo, means forgiven. Meaning that that if a person engages in the concept of Shabbos, then Shabbos brings a certain level of kapora, a certain level of forgiveness, a certain level of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why is that? So the obvious reason is very simple. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to keep Shabbos because Shabbos is the attesting to the creation of the world. And so therefore we attest to that, and at least we have something. So the Gemara also says the following. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Ilmale Shamru Yisrael Shabbos Rishona, had all the entire Jewish people kept the first Shabbos ever, Lo Shalta Bahen Uma Velashon, then there would not have been one nation or one culture or one type of person of any sort would be able to have any type of power over them. As it says, Vayi Bayom HaShvi'i Yatzu Min Ha'am Lilkot. Because it says on the seventh day that somebody went out and he went to gather some wood. And after that it says, Vayavo Amalek. So what it shows is that the only reason that Amalek came was because this one person had been Machal Shabbos. So the Chilul of Shabbos, by the way, the concept of Shmirat Shabbos, which means guarding or keep, we translate as keeping Shabbos, that concept is contrasted with Chilul Shabbos. The word Chilul comes from Chalal, which means a hole. We make a hole in Shabbos. We damage the integrity of what that day is, and obviously everything that it means. So it comes along, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So Rabbi Yochanan then says in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Ilmale Mishamrim Yisrael Shtei Shabbosos Kilchasan. Said if the Jewish people would keep 2 Shabboses according to the halacha, then what? Miyad Nigalim. Immediately we would be redeemed. And so therefore we can see a very powerful theme that comes out here, and that is how important the concept, not just of respecting Shabbos and honoring Shabbos, but the actual keeping of Shabbos according to halakha, because halakha gives us the framework to understand what Shabbos is meant to be in a real way. And so therefore, the Gemara telling us Shabbos is the thing we've got to look at. And when we look at Shabbos in such a profound way, so then we can begin to engage with it in its real way, with its real meaning. Okay, so let's start off. We understand there are 39 malachot. What we need to understand is what is a malacha itself. Let's look at some sources, perhaps some definitions, and then we're going to go into a little bit more just as part of our introduction to the whole process. And Bezrat Hashem, it will set us a good foundation for the actual discussion of of each malacha as we go. So, source number one, obviously, our two sources are going to be the most primary sources. There are other sources for Shabbos. Shabbos is mentioned many times in the Torah, but our two primary sources are going to be from the Aseret HaDibrot, from the Ten Commandments. Because here we see, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho, where we remember, Zachor means to remember it. Sheish damim tavod melachtecha, v'asita kol melachtecha, we must work for 6 days. Yom HaShvi'i Shabbat la'Adonai Elohecha, the seventh day is Shabbos for Hashem. Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. You should not do any melacha. Now, I'm not going to define melacha. Some people define it as work. Some people define it as other things. We're not going to define melacha because we have to broaden an understanding of what melacha is and who must not do that. Everybody, whoever's around you, your children, yourself, your wife, you name it, not allowed to do anything. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in 6 days. So that's source number one. Source number two is Sheish Jamim Tavod Asiz Komalachtecha. It's the same thing, right? But Yom HaShvi Shabbat Hashem Lot as a Komalacha, the same thing. You mustn't do any malacha. Who, you, etc. Same words, exactly the same words. And why? But you should remember that you're a slave and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took you out. So we have the Shabbos, and we know that we say that in Kiddush, that Shabbos represents two things. It represents Bereshit, meaning the creation of the world, and it also has a direct connection into the concept of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, those are separate shirim in and of themselves. Just wanted to bring you the two primary psukim which mention this concept of melacha. Let's try and understand exactly what melacha is. I'm going to mute everyone if you don't mind. There we go. So it says, Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. So what are the malachot that are forbidden, and why are they forbidden? Let's try and understand that. Right? Does the Torah put so much importance on not doing malacha on Shabbos, to the extent that if one does, there's some serious penalties, but the Torah never tells us really what malacha is, not outright. So which malachot does the Torah mean to prohibit? So the Gemara tells us the following. I'm sorry I didn't get the translation in this part. Apologies. So the Gemara is the Gemara in the Talmud Bavli on Shabbat Memtet Amud Bet. Says Avot Malachot Arba'im Chasar Echat. There are 40 malachot less one keneged me. What do they come to correspond to? So it says the Gemara keneged avodot hamishkan. It's coming to correspond to the work that was done in the Mishkan. And Rashi says keneged avodot hamishkan. All those that are mentioned, we'll see in Perek Klal Gadol, which is later on in the Gemara, they were all needed for the Mishkan. Parashat Shabbat and the Parasha of Shabbos, Nismecha, the Parashat Melechet HaMishkan, Lilmod Emena. And the Parasha of Shabbos often comes juxtaposed to the Parasha that deals with the Mishkan in order that we can learn from it. So we learn from the concept of the Mishkan into the Melachos of Shabbos. But now, what is a melacha? And I saw such a beautiful description of it given by the OU in America. They describe it as purposeful, creative interactions with nature. And if we can begin to explore what this purposeful, creative interactions with nature means, then I think what we can do is we'll have some real deep understanding of what Shabbos really is for all of us. So comes along the Mishkan, and let's understand. Malachas correspond with the operations performed during the construction of the Mishkan. In fact, says the OU spokesman, he says that the Mishkan is actually a model. The creation of the Mishkan is a model of all the possible human creative activities that can be done. And we'll see a little bit later what they all are, and we'll understand it. Because all the activities of the Mishkan are of a positive, constructive nature. Therefore, the malachas of Shabbos, which are defined by melechet machshevet, must also have a positive character. What is melechet machshevet? Let's try and understand it. That according to the basic understanding from Chazal, from our sages, we've got this concept of melechet machshevet. Machshevet is related to the concept of machshava, which means thought or purpose. So what really is that something which has a positive purpose is the thing that Asra Torah, that the Torah prohibits. It's something which is purely destructive is not considered to be a malacha. So for example, on a simple doraisa Torah level, if a person would just come and take a piece of plastic like this and tear it in half, that's just destructive for no real rhyme or reason, for absolute purpose, and therefore from a doraita level, on a pure Torah level, it's not prohibited. But on the other hand, demolition, which is performed with a purpose, such as clearing an area for new construction, then that's a positive purpose, and therefore it's considered to be a malacha because it is, and this is the big word here, is purposeful. So as long as we are coming to matakain, to improve something, or makalkel, to ruin or destroy something, but for a purpose of doing something with it, so then becomes asr. And you'll see here, there's the malacha number 34 and malacha number 35. Malacha is building, called boneh, which is creating a shelter or building something. And then there's also a malacha of soter, which means to destroy, but it's constructive destruction for the purpose of building something else. Now, now it's all about kavanah. We said that it's melechet machshevet, means you have to have kavanah, you have to have intention, you have to have a certain type of consciousness in the performance of the action that one is doing in order for it to be prohibited. So let's say, for example, you tear off a branch from a tree. That's a malacha of koitzer. You're not allowed to do that. But if you be napping, right, you're schloffing close to the tree, and you wake up, you stretch, and you accidentally tore off a branch, you didn't perform a malacha on a technical level. And out of this comes two aspects, two important things that we need to understand within our halachot of Shabbat. The first one is the concept of b'mezid. B'mezid, which means you do it deliberately or on purpose. Contrasted to that is the concept of shogeg, which we translate as like not on purpose, inadvertently. And let's try and understand. So you didn't know that the action was forbidden, or if you mistook the facts concerning your circumstance. So for example, you didn't realize that it was Shabbos. Sometimes like you wake up, you don't realize that it's Shabbos and you switch the light on. That's b'shoigeg. It's not deliberate. It's not done with the knowledge that it was wrong and with the intention of doing the action. It's b'shoigeg. You did it, not realizing the facts were that those are not that you shouldn't have done that. So there needs to be, on the simple level of malacha, there needs to be kavanah, there needs to be intention. Okay. We're going to look at these 8 conditions to be classified as a malacha very quickly because I want to move on. So number 1, your frame of mind has to be right during that. Now I have this sheet with all these things written down, which I will happily send on the group, and that everybody can have that. I'll also send this whole PowerPoint presentation as well on the group. So firstly, you have to have the right frame of mind. Mitasek means you've got to be working with the thing. Davar she'eno mitkaven, if something you didn't have intention to do, so then it's not on a Torah prohibition level problematic. Malacha she'eno tzricha legufo, if you do something where you don't actually need the result of that malacha, that also seems to be okay. The manner in which things are carried out. Sometimes you do something what's called kedarka in its normal way of doing it. That's problematic. But you might do something kala'achar yad. You might do something in a different way with what's called a shinui. And in doing it that way, one doesn't go against Shabbat from a Torah level. Remember, we'll get to the Torah level and the other levels. So, for example, the way people would put on their alarms on Shabbos the back of a spoon, since that's not the normal way, so therefore there are certain heterim that allow that. There's also direct asiyah and groma, which is an indirect. Sometimes there's situations where more people rather than less people are doing the act, and that makes it less problematic. And then there's matakan, where you fix something, or mitkaim, or you make something last for a longer period of time. So these are summaries. I know I'm running through this. I just want to just get through some of the important background to going into things. Okay. This Mishnah that I've just quoted here is the Mishnah that says, as we said, from that Gemara that we learned earlier on, where the Mishnah, the Gemara told us that all the malachas, all the different these prohibited purposeful activities, all of those, there are 40 less one. We have to understand that, and we'll get to that at some point. I'm not going into that now. And now the Mishnah goes through a whole list. And I actually tried to bring you the translation of all of these from the Mishnah, but they're so complicated, each one, because each one has got a little bit of a nuance in. So the translation is like 1.5 pages. So instead of doing that, what I did is that I put them down in their order according to the status in which we find them in the Melachos of Shabbos. And I have a sheet with all of this, which I'm happy to share, and I'll send as well on the group. So if we start as follows, there are different aspects of the Melacha for doing specific things. So number one, we know that in the Mishkan, in the Beit HaMikdash, you needed to have bread. Okay, why did you need to have bread? Because one of the things was what's called the shulchan. It's called the table, and on that table, every single Shabbos they would bring what's called the lechem apanim. They called the showbread, and the showbread they would bring to put onto the onto the shulchan. They would take the old one off, and the new one would be put on. So if that's the case, we need to be able to go through the process of making bread in order to have that bread on the shulchan. And if that's the case, then all the malachas, all the different creative, purposeful activities that are going to be done in order to make bread are the things that are going to be prohibited on Shabbos. So if we look at those, then we have these concepts. So there's plowing, obviously, which is called choresh, sowing zoreah, reaping kotzer, gathering mamar, threshing dash, winnowing zoire, sorting boire, grinding tochen, sifting tochen, amalgamation, which is bringing things together, lash, and baking and cooking is bishul and offer. So there's all these. Sorry, that sifting should be marakeh, not tochen. I apologize. So all these things come together. These are the 11 things which are called sidura dapat, the things that are used in order to make bread. But what happens out of these things, and as we'll go through, we'll begin to understand that every single malacha, these are the malachas, every malacha has an associate, what's called tolda. Because there's avot malachot, which means the father or the primary category, and there's tolda, which means the subcategory. It's as important that we'll see how it plays out. But the purpose of this column over here is to show where some of these things manifest. Firstly, like for example, digging is obviously plowing. It's the same thing. But dragging chairs, we'll see, is a problem on a sand floor, because it will make certain furrows, and those furrows are problematic. And as we go through learning about all of these different things, we'll see where the problems come in and how we deal with them and what we can do and what we can't do. So these ones, the sidura dapat, are really, I suppose, the main ones that we would find in the kitchen. Obviously, there are other places, but mainly in the kitchen are these things. Then we have ones that we find in the home, and that goes from the making of clothes as well as the steps for writing. But let's look at this a little bit. Let's just look at making of clothes and go through these malachot. So there's shearing. What clothes they need to make? They need to make the clothes of the Kohen Gadol and all the other Kohanim. And they also needed to make certain yeriot, certain of the tapestries for the Mishkan itself. So there's a lot of weaving and tying and sewing and all different things that were needed in order to make different garments, different clothes, different fabrics. So all of these, as you can see, there's shearing, scouring, combing, dyeing, spinning, warping, constructing two loops, weaving, unraveling, tying, untying, sewing, tearing. All of these different things are there to make these different types of garments. And if you look at the and how we unpack that a little bit, you can see that some of them are very clear. Making a permanent knot is something that we use all the time. Are you allowed to tie your shoelaces on Shabbos? And if so, how? Is a man allowed to do a necktie on Shabbos? And if so, how? Can you take let's say you've got your challahs in a packet, that that you got from the shops, and they tied the packet. Are you allowed to open that knot that is tied of that packet of that challah? Is there another way of doing it? Is it a problem because you've got tying permanent knots and untying permanent knots? Are you allowed to let's see another one, just as a simple. Are you allowed to put food coloring onto your food? Are you allowed to comb your wig? Are you allowed to comb your hair? Right? Are you allowed, let's say you just make kiddush and some wine falls on the tablecloth. Are you allowed to put some salt on it? Are you allowed to put water on it? Are you allowed to in any way launder? If your nails are long, are you allowed to cut them? All these things come up as part of the halachas of Shabbos. And what really becomes in the halachas of Shabbos is such a profound and enormous consciousness of everything that we do, which really is what it's about, by the way, because Shabbos becomes a space of deep personal consciousness to understand the role that Hashem plays in our lives. Okay, then there's writing. Writing, what are the new writing? They needed writing, obviously, for the different books that they had that they needed to write, the Megillot, for the Torah, all different things. But also one of the big things for writing was that they had to write on the different parts of the Mishkan, so that they would be able to know which part connected to the other part. And so in order to do that, you need to have skins, on which to write. And therefore all the skinning process goes through that. You need to be able to write. You need to have cutting things. You need to be able to scour things. You need to be able to erase because maybe you wrote the wrong one. And all these things are going to apply themselves. So for example, if we look at mamachek, sanding, smoothing, understand, applying creams. Are we allowed to put on cream? Is this the issue where it comes to putting on makeup? What about mechatech? Can we cut food to specific size? Are you allowed to cut toilet paper on Shabbos? Because it comes in it's specifically manufactured to tear in a certain space. Are you allowed to count? Let's say you had a house, you say, oh, this is a lovely house. Let me see, I want to buy it. Can you measure? Can you measure the size of the room just because you want to have an idea? All of these things become important in Shabbos. I had a friend of mine in Cape Town, the late Stan Khan, bless his heart, and we were learning the halachas of Shabbos. He says, it's easy just to lie in bed, because then it's very unlikely that you'll be over anything. But that's not how we work. We don't work that we avoid it. We work that we engage, we go into it in order to be able to understand it. And then once we understand it, becomes so much more meaningful. And part of what I'm doing is I don't want it to become that Shabbos becomes like this burden where we see, I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do that. That's the easy thing to do. We can take the book and we can read, you can't do X, Y, and Z. But if we understand it, then we can find the spaces of what we should be doing. And when we find the space of what we should be doing and can be doing, then that gives our Shabbos a very meaningful space. Then, of course, there is the steps of building a house itself. The house being the Mishkan. And there's building, demolishing, as we spoke about, extinguishing flames because those were used to light certain things, lighting a flame. Then there's the two last malachot are very complicated, and that is, the first one is Makeh B'Patish. Makeh B'Patish is the final hammer blow on whatever it is that one is doing. So, for example, you could have on Shabbos a garment that is 99.9% ready to wear. And all you need to do is just like maybe cut a small little piece of cotton, and that would allow it to be worn properly. Well, you can't do that. That's Makeh B'Patish. You're completing the thing, even if it's just a tiny thing, but the whole thing's ready. It has numerous applications. We'll get into that. The one that is the most strange of all of them, and Baruch Hashem, in Johannesburg at least, we don't have to worry so much about it. And that's the concept of hotzah, which is carrying. Now, interestingly enough, hotzah, carrying or transferring, as I call it here, transferring from one domain to another domain is an enormous part of halakha, and it in fact begins the Masechet, the tractate of Shabbat. Why is that? Because you think that it's all about basically creative activity, changing one thing into another thing, but it's also transferring. And transferring, hotzah, is a massive part of Shabbat. When you're in Eruv, you don't really realize it, but I remember when we used to live in Cape Town, before they built the Eruv, it was really complicated. Could you get somebody to push a pram? Where could they push it? When could they push it? You can't carry your sforim to shul. You got to make sure everything's prepared before. It's quite a complicated thing. You want to take a gift to somebody, you forgot it at home, you didn't take it before Shabbos. You can't take, and which gifts can you take? Because it would be food on Shabbos. That's another discussion. But so it becomes complicated. So all of these things, these 39 melachot, all fit into effectively 4 categories: bread, clothes, writing, and making a house. And we'll go through, please God, all of them in an appropriate way to try and get a proper understanding of each one. As I mentioned earlier, within the categories of these 39 melachot are what we call avot. The avot are the 39, and then there are toladot. So what does that mean? So the av malacha is the principal act, meaning exactly the thing that was done in the Mishkan. Whereas there's a subcategory of things called toladot, which weren't done in the Mishkan, but they're very similar in nature and concept to the principle malacha. And these are also an isurei doraita, meaning that they are prohibited by the Torah. A toladah is not a rabbinic thing. It's a Torah thing that we are not allowed to do, but it doesn't fall into the name of malacha because it isn't what was done in the Mishkan. And we'll see examples of what that is. So let's look at some examples. Number one, zoreah. Zoreah is sowing. Okay, so what is that? The av malacha is planting a seed. You're sowing your seeds. But the premise of zoreah includes promoting plant growth in any way. Therefore, watering plants, if you look carefully, you'll see, I'm just going to go up again. You don't see anywhere here about watering. It doesn't say anything about watering plants. There's no watering of plants, but watering of plants is a tolda of zoreah. So it's as prohibited as the actual planting of the seeds, but it's called a tolda because it's interesting. They didn't seem to water the plants in the time of the Mishkan somehow. Okay, what about melaben? Melaben we spoke about. Are you allowed to in any way wash your tablecloth that got a little bit of wine on Shabbos? So where does it come from? So washing dirty wool in preparation for dyeing or spinning is the av malacha, right? There's the wool, it's filthy dirty, coming off the sheep. You're going to prepare it, you're going to wash it. But the premise includes cleansing a fabric of any color or material by any means. Therefore, wetting fabrics with clear liquids, scrubbing stains from even dry garments, or even brushing dust off clothing in specific ways actually are toladot and are isurei doraita. They're prohibited from the Torah. So that is something to bear in mind. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Then another example is tofer, sewing. Apologies. It was just the nicest picture that I had of someone sewing, which is it's tsanua. It's not in any way implying that only women sew. It's just the picture. So the av malacha is the act of sewing 2 or more stitches in a seam. But the premise is the bonding of 2 objects to form a single entity. Therefore, gluing, taping 2 sheets of paper firmly together is in a permanent manner is a toladah. So you can't take sticky tape and use it on Shabbos to stick things down together because it's a tolda of tofer. So if a page tears by mistake or something of that nature, one has to be aware what one can and one can't do with it. Okay, if that's the case, if you've got av melacha and you've got tolada, so what's the practical difference between them? Why does the Torah have to have this concept? Torah meaning the broad Torah of the Chumash itself, as well as the Talmud. So the difference is brought down by the Rambam, and the Rambam tells us very simply. It is the same if one does one of the primary categories of forbidden work or one of the subcategories. The primary categories mean the avot or the toladot. He is liable for excision when volitional. If he does it on purpose, he gets what's called karet, which is spiritual cutting off. Stoning if witnesses came. I mean, it's quite hectic. Okay. And a sin offering when inadvertent. If so, what's the difference between the primary categories and the subcategories? The only difference between them is the matter of the sacrifice alone. One who does many primary categories in one forgetful spell is liable to a sin offering for each and every primary category. So if a person does 5 or 6 av malachot in one hit, he has to bring different korbanot for each one of those avot malachot. But if he did a primary category and it's tolda, if he does an av and it's told her in one thing, and that can happen in many ways, but there are various examples. We're not going to go through that now, right? Then he's only liable for one offering. So the only real, we call in Gemara speak nafkamin, a difference between the two is if you do an av and it's told her. But if you do an av and a tolda of another av, that's considered to be like the av itself. The av and its tolda is only one korban. Av and many avot are within one action, then it's many korbanot. Okay, I know that we've gone through a lot of information here. I just want to give you a broad-based understanding, and I hope that everyone's okay with that. Okay. Having understood that we have the 39 melachot, we also have the toladot. There's also a mitzvah of Tishbot. You can see the word Tishbot there has within it the word Shabbat. So what does it mean? So it was an interesting question. Like, what would Shabbos look like if you only had the 39 melachot? That's all. And they're told us. So then a person could spend the whole day engaged in physical work, measuring his produce, and if there were an Erev, he could conduct a lot of his business. Shops could be open with buying and selling going on, because you saw there's no issue of buying and selling. Shabbos would be like a regular work day. It would lack the character of Yom Shabbaton. This is one reason why the Torah says, V'yom hashvi'i tishbot. On the seventh day, you have to do what's called tishbot, which we translate as resting, or stopping, or shevet, or just sitting. So I found this is just a wonderful picture, right? This is Shabbos, right? This is Shabbos. Yeah, don't worry, I'm not Jewish. I'll take care of all the malacha for you. Call me a cab to take home. I'll come and give me yourself. You can update my computer. This, by the way, is a minefield called Amira Lenochri. Asking a non-Jew to do work for us on Shabbos, which we will get into, but it's difficult and it's complicated and it's exciting because there's so much to learn. Okay, therefore, there's a positive mitzvah from the Torah to rest on Shabbos from physical labor, we understand. Chazal added a layer of protection to it with the laws of Mukhtar and other rabbinic prohibitions, therefore making Shabbos into a day of not only physical labor, but menucha, of absolute ability to rest in a real way. So Mukhtar, we're not going to go into, that is enormous. It's an enormous thing as well. We'll get there. I just want to throw out ideas for now. So what gave Chazal the right to create these halachot? You've got these rabbinic enactments, these rabbinic laws of Shabbat, the Rabbanan. So where do they come from? So the Torah says, Ushmartem es mishmarti. You must guard that which I need guarding of. So the Gemara explains, what does it mean? Rav Ashi said, Ushmartem es mishmarti, asu mishmeret mishmarti. You, Chazal, you the rabbis, you the sages, you need to make a guardian for that which needs to be guarded of mine. We see that in Pirkei Avot. In Pirkei Avot, in the first Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, we have this concept of making a fence for the Torah. It says, Moshe kibel Torah misinai, Masarela, Yoshua, Moshe receives the Torah, gives it to Yoshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly. Okay, and those men of the Great Assembly, who now have this incredible challenge of how to keep Bnei Israel together, they say three things. The first one is, firstly, be careful in the manner in which you administer justice. Very important. Then, make sure that you have lots of pupils. You have lots of pupils, then the word of Torah can spread. But for our purposes, one of the things that they found was the most important thing for them is the concept of asus yagli Torah, make a fence around the Torah to ensure that the integrity of the basics of the Torah are held. Because if we don't make fences, then it's quite easy to breach that integrity. So let's give an example. Climbing a tree on Shabbat. Sorry about the stinky feet. Climbing a tree on Shabbat midoraisa. There's actually no violation of a melacha by climbing a tree. If we go back to those melachas, we'll see there's nowhere to say you're not allowed to climb a tree. But midrabanan, Chazal said, hold on a second. You're going to climb up a tree. And if you climb up a tree, you know what could happen? You might get up to the top of the tree and you're feeling so victorious, or you break off the thing, a tree, just to wave it up to show your victorious way in which you climbed the tree. And that would violate the Isur D'Oraisa of Koitzer, the Torah prohibition of cutting, of taking, or breaking off something from its growing source. And if that's the case, we have to be careful. So therefore, Chazal created an enactment: you don't climb trees on Shabbos. So the concept of Tishbot is this concept of you shall rest, implying you must rest from doing things that are not even actual work. Many things that the sages prohibited on the ground that are not harmonized with the rest, with the idea of the rest. Some things are forbidden because they resemble prohibited kind of works, as we said, and others are forbidden as a preventative measure because they may result in doing work that's forbidden under certain penalties. Sorry, I'm not sure why it's doing that. Oops, sorry, I'm not sure what happened here. Just give me a sec. I just want to see what happened to my PowerPoint. Okay. Seems like it went a bit wonky. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Here we go. Okay, so for example, writing. Writing is the Av Melacha. We know that you're not allowed to write, and the way writing on the Av Melacha way works is that you're not allowed to write 2 letters. So you're not allowed to write. But what about borrowing money or lending money or buying and selling things? All of those are rabbinically prohibited. Why? Because they may lead you to write. And we always have this joke, something will lead to mixed dancing. Chazal were very worried to ensure that we have siyagim, we have these fences around to ensure that it doesn't lead to that one thing that we're very concerned about. One of them is writing. Okay, Mukhtar. Mukhtar falls into a similar category. Mukhtar is a rabbinic enactment. One of the reasons for Mukhtar is very simple. If we move the items that are Mukhtar, it may lead us to do a malacha with one of those objects. And just by the way, what's so important, Mukhtar is not touching. Mukhtar is moving. You can touch something, you can't move it. Some things you can't lean on because they're muktzah. But it's not about touching it. It's about moving it, and that's a very important and fundamental thing to understand. And finally, which we spoke about a little bit earlier, is this concept of Amir La'akum. Chazal also said that we have to be very, very careful as to who can help me on a Shabbos. One of the reasons prohibited to ask a non-Jew to malacha for you on Shabbos is because it'll cause Shabbos to become insignificant to your eyes, and you may come to violate the Shabbos yourself. Chazal were very, very worried that if we start doing things kind of vicariously through others, then we stop finding the importance in Shabbos. Honestly, Amir La'akum is something that we need to learn a lot about, because it is it's so nogah, it's so important for us living in South Africa. We all have help in some way or another on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, either at night or during the day. And our question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we use that help in a proper way in order to maintain our meaning in Shabbos Kodesh? And so that is really my introduction. I know it's an enormous amount of work, enormous amount of information. I know it's quite daunting, but don't stress. Really don't stress. We've got lots to learn. Baruch Hashem, it's going to be a journey that we'll go through together. And as we go through this journey, and as we try to understand what Shabbos requires from us, I believe this fully. As the Chofetz Chaim says, the more we put into our learning on Shabbos, the more we'll get out of Shabbos. Because it becomes a real space of deep consciousness, deep connection to that which is really special and that which is so real in our lives. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And Bezrat Hashem, this will be our slot Tuesday evenings, 8 o'clock, to learn more about the halachos of Shabbos and to